week we've been really focusing on raising the profile of organic agriculture amongst the team. So we've done a lot of talking. Yesterday we had our side event, which was quite successful. The side event was called People for Commodities, and we're really trying to focus on raising awareness of putting poor people first, especially those in Africa and the developing world. They're already hungry, and we don't want that situation to be made worse by climate policies. So,
I get quite angry at both statements in the publications from the Royal Society, but also from leading agrochemical firms, who base their determination to drive the future of agriculture under climate change in particular directions on shock horror headlines that by 2050, somewhere in mid-century, we'll be hitting a global population of 9 billion, and therefore we need to move in particular directions. Well, it certainly seems to be the case because we're locked into a particular demographic structure that populations will increase and will probably peak around that figure around the middle of the century. What is not well recognized is that in terms of demographic structure, we've already passed the inflection point. In other words, the rate of growth from around the 1980s began to decline. The rate of growth in the global population is continuing to decline, and it will actually turn negative, barring some unforeseen demographic events, around the mid-century. And from then on, global populations will continue to shrink. Now, so what I'm saying is we have a bottleneck that will last several decades of maximum population, maximum pressure on the world's natural resources, and maximum demand for food. But this is not necessarily the long-term future. So a challenge to the negotiators is, how do we make the transition for the immediate short term that will take us through the bottleneck in a sensible way as we look towards the longer term future. And there are huge opportunities here for getting it right, and huge opportunities for getting it disastrously wrong.
Juan Hofmeister, he's a delegate from the Bolivian government. He's their agriculture and adaptation negotiator. He gave a very good overview of where agriculture is in terms of the CDM, in terms of international sector approaches to agriculture mitigation and adaptation, and also to NAMAs, which are nationally appropriate mitigation activities. Those are plans which developing countries are putting in place to demonstrate how they can mitigate climate change. And that is a big opportunity, perhaps, for organic agriculture to work with national governments at the national level to get ecosystem-based agriculture into their action plans. So, all in all, is a very good.
This immediately brought concerns to a lot of developing countries because, well, first, the idea of cooperative sectoral approaches was not to be just a matter of agriculture. There's a lot of sectors where there needs to be cooperation, and in particular for us, it seems somewhat troublesome to talk about cooperative sectoral approach through technology transfer from developed countries to developing countries in agriculture. To think of what that means, it's quite problematic because it actually represents a threat to the models of agriculture that we are trying to protect. It represents a threat to the rights of the peoples to food. It represents a threat to food sovereignty, etc. So all of a sudden, these were the concerns in which we started the negotiations, and in doing so, the first thing that we said in the negotiations was that none of the work to come out of this process on cooperative sectoral approaches on agriculture could be linked to the carbon market. This was the sort of preamble in which we said that any conversation was going to happen. From there, we engaged into what became a rather extensive negotiation process mostly through Copenhagen, of several days negotiating from 3 in the afternoon to 3 in the morning, to finally come with a text that was, as you can now look at it, we're trying to ensure that there is all possible safeguards to ensure that this doesn't become a threat to small farmers, that doesn't become a threat to the rights of indigenous peoples. I mean, we have heard of, for example, the issue of access and benefit sharing doesn't represent a problem to traditional knowledge and practices, and to, of course, food security, food sovereignty and livelihoods. As well as in general, developing countries wanted to ensure that agriculture was not brought in this context of cooperation as a source of mitigation, but as something more comprehensive that also included adaptation. And that is
the next speaker was Matika from the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. They're a very active network, I think of 40 countries throughout Africa. They come together, they're very prominent here in the talks in Bonn.
In October, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa is hosting a big forum where agricultural issues and climate change are going to be discussed. I think these are some of the opportunities we need to exploit so that we can influence process in such a way that it reflects our concerns.
Simply about raising productivity. We can do that. It's really very easy at the technical level, even with the technologies we have now. The productivity increase, even under a scenario of 9 billion people, is a much smaller challenge than the productivity increase we've already achieved over the last 15 years.
We have a big network of organic farmers in Africa. Those case studies are actual real case studies from real projects or real activities happening in Africa. And those networks, those national movements in Africa are lobbying and working with local and other NGOs and working with governments to try and have more uptake of the main reason we're here is to reach out to national governments, particularly in Africa where climate change is going to have a big impact, is to try and get them to look at more of these case studies and use them and work with their national organic movements in those countries. So that's what we're trying to do.
Here we're going to these conferences, and why are we doing that? We're doing that because we're worried. We're worried, well, you all know organic agriculture is well known for our environmental worries, but we are also worried for the sustainable development of the planet. You all know the planet is challenged. We have the 1 billion hungry people, and this is actually unacceptable, and this is something we should all be shocked about, and we should do something about. We have these debates, Doreen, you mentioned it very much, these debates about how to go on with a second green revolution and these kind of things, whereas we have the IAASTD evidence actually that alternative strategies would be much more effective to meet the challenge of this planet. That's exactly why we are here, out of the conviction that the challenges, the present challenges, are the food security, are biodiversity, and are the climate change. If we do not manage to bring these challenges together, we will not achieve sustainability. And that's actually why we're action plans.
So all in all, it was a very good side event. And now today we're just wrapping up here and looking forward to the next opportunity to get our message across of high sequestration, low emission, food secure farming.